The First Wizarding Battle, 1920s to 1945. The First Wizarding War was led by Gellert Grindelwald, the dark wizard who emerged in the early 20th century and sought domination of the magical and non-magical worlds. His ideology was built around the phrase "for the greater good," a belief that wizards were superior and should rule muggles as masters over servants. This conflict was not confined to Britain, but spread across Europe and threatened the global wizarding community. Grindelwald's rise began after his expulsion from Durmstrang Institute for dangerous magical experiments and violent behavior. He traveled across Europe, gathering forbidden knowledge and forging contacts. His ambitions sharpened when he came to Godric's Hollow and met Albus Dumbledore. The two young wizards bonded over their brilliance, a mutual disdain for muggles, and a shared dream of creating a new order. They spoke openly about conquering the non-magical world, establishing wizard rule, and pursuing the legendary Deathly Hallows. Their relationship was intense and personal, but it fractured after the death of Dumbledore's sister Ariana during a heated duel involving Grindelwald, Albus, and Aberforth. Grindelwald fled, and Dumbledore abandoned any ambition of magical supremacy. Over the next decades, Grindelwald built his movement. He established Nurmengard, both as a prison for enemies and a fortress of power. His followers, known as acolytes, enforced his vision. He capitalized on existing tensions within the wizarding world, promising pureblood families influence and control, while relegating opponents to the lowest rungs of society. Grindelwald's ideology envisioned a caste system: pureblood wizards at the top, half-bloods in a middle tier, dissenters and enemies imprisoned, and muggles enslaved, bound by magical contracts similar to those used on house elves. Grindelwald also sought legitimacy. In 1937, he attempted to seize control of the International Confederation of Wizards by manipulating the Qilin election ceremony, an ancient tradition where the purest creature alive would select a leader. Grindelwald bewitched the creature to choose him, but his plot was exposed, and he fled. Despite this setback, he maintained momentum. By the late 1930s and early 1940s, his influence extended across much of continental Europe. He recruited giants, dark creatures, and disaffected wizards into his ranks. The non-magical Second World War ran parallel to his campaign, and though the two conflicts were not officially linked, Grindelwald's war further destabilized Europe and blurred boundaries between magical and muggle suffering. Dumbledore's inability to act against Grindelwald for years was not due to indifference, but because of a blood pact the two had made in their youth, a magically binding vow never to move against one another. This oath left Grindelwald unchecked, and many in the wizarding world questioned why Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard alive, refused to confront him. Only later did Dumbledore find a way to weaken the pact, freeing him to oppose his former friend. The war reached its climax in 1945. Grindelwald, empowered by his mastery of the Elder Wand, had become almost unstoppable. His forces terrorized wizarding communities, and Nurmengard filled with prisoners. The decisive turning point came when Dumbledore challenged him to a duel. This battle is remembered as the most legendary duel in wizarding history. Despite Grindelwald's immense power and possession of the Elder Wand, Dumbledore triumphed. Grindelwald was defeated and imprisoned in Nurmengard, a fortress of his own making where he remained until Voldemort killed him half a century later. The aftermath of Grindelwald's defeat brought relief to the wizarding world, but scars remained. His ideology of blood supremacy and global conquest set a precedent for future Dark Lords. His defeat also established Dumbledore as the foremost defender of the wizarding world, though the personal cost of facing a man he had once loved weighed heavily on him. Grindelwald's war is considered the first great wizarding war, and its conclusion in 1945 marked both the end of a global dark movement and the beginning of a fragile peace that Voldemort would later shatter. The Second Wizarding War, Voldemort's First Rise, 1970 to 1981. The Second Wizarding War, often referred to in canon as the First Wizarding War because it directly followed Grindelwald's defeat, was the period of Lord Voldemort's first rise to power. Lasting roughly from 1970 until 1981, this war was marked by widespread terror, assassinations, disappearances, and the collapse of trust within wizarding society. It officially ended on Halloween 1981, when Voldemort attempted to kill Harry Potter and was struck down by his own rebounding curse. The roots of the conflict stretch back to Tom Riddle's early years. After graduating from Hogwarts in 1945, Riddle transformed himself into Lord Voldemort, rejecting his half-muggle identity and embracing a new persona built around blood purity and domination. During his school years, he had already formed the nucleus of what would become the Death Eaters, first under the name Knights of Walpurgis. These followers were a mix of wealthy purebloods, ambitious social climbers, and cruel opportunists, people drawn to his charisma and promises of power. In the 1940s and 1950s, Riddle pursued the creation of Horcruxes, splitting his soul to ensure immortality. By the early 1970s, he had already created several, including his diary, the Gaunt family ring, and Hufflepuff's cup. This dark magic made him effectively unkillable, even if his body was destroyed. Voldemort's obsession with immortality went hand in hand with his ideology of pure-blood supremacy, creating both the means and justification for a reign of terror. The official start of the war is usually placed around 1970 to 71, when Voldemort began open recruitment and rebranded his followers as Death Eaters. They unleashed a wave of violence across Wizarding Britain. Their attacks were marked by the dark mark conjured over the homes of the murdered, instilling panic throughout the community. Death Eaters targeted Muggleborns, Half-Bloods, and Blood Traders, as well as anyone who opposed Voldemort's rise. Muggles were also tortured and killed, both as sport and to create fear. Voldemort's forces included not only fanatical wizards, but also magical creatures and beings alienated from mainstream society. Giants, werewolves under Fenrir Greyback, Dementors, and Acromantulas were recruited to his side. This coalition of dark allies spread destruction across Britain, overwhelming ministry resources and spreading fear. The Ministry of Magic struggled to respond. Ministers came and went, often ineffective or compromised. Squib riots, blood status controversies, and political infighting weakened the government's legitimacy. The ministry also attempted to downplay Voldemort's threat to avoid panic, but this only allowed the Death Eaters more freedom to act. Paranoia grew as Voldemort's use of the Imperious Curse turned even trusted colleagues and family members into unwilling agents. No one could be certain who had chosen to join Voldemort and who was under his control. In opposition, Albus Dumbledore founded the Order of the Phoenix in 1971. This secret group of witches and wizards carried out guerrilla-style resistance against Voldemort's army. Its ranks included Moody, Kingsley Shacklebolt, Frank and Alice Longbottom, and Fabian and Gideon Pruitt, among many others. Although outnumbered and outmatched, the Order inflicted important defeats and kept resistance alive. Yet the cost was heavy. Members were killed, families were destroyed, and the Order was constantly on the defensive. As the war intensified in the late 1970s, the Death Eaters' cruelty escalated. Families like the Bones and the McKinnons were massacred. Dorcas Meadows and Benji Fenwick were murdered. The Prewett brothers died in battle. The violence reached a peak around 1980 when Voldemort began to focus on a prophecy delivered by Sybil Trelawney. This prophecy spoke of a child born at the end of July who had the power to defeat him. Severus Snape, overhearing part of the prophecy, relayed it to Voldemort. Convinced it referred to Harry Potter rather than Neville Longbottom, Voldemort targeted the Potters. Meanwhile, some Death Eaters began to question their master. Regulus Black, once loyal to Voldemort's cause, discovered the truth about Horcruxes and attempted to destroy one, sacrificing his life in the process. Others, like Lucius Malfoy, concealed their involvement under layers of political influence and plausible deniability. Yet the most devoted, Bellatrix Lestrange, Barty Crouch Jr., and others, deepened their fanaticism, committing atrocities in Voldemort's name. The war's final act centered on the Potters. After defying Voldemort 3 times, James and Lily were placed under the Fidelius charm. At first, Sirius Black was to be their secret keeper, but Peter Pettigrew was chosen instead. Pettigrew betrayed them, leading Voldemort to Godric's Hollow on October 31st, 1981. There, James was killed instantly. Lily was murdered after refusing to stand aside, and Voldemort attempted to kill baby Harry. Lily's sacrificial protection caused the killing curse to rebound, destroying Voldemort's body and ending the war. In the aftermath, Death Eaters were hunted down. Some, like Bellatrix and the Lestrange brothers, were captured after torturing the Longbottoms into insanity. Many others claimed they had acted only under the Imperious Curse and escaped justice. Lucius Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle, and others avoided prison entirely. Voldemort himself survived, reduced to a bodiless form, and fled into hiding in Albania. The Second Wizarding War scarred Britain deeply. More lives were lost than in the later conflict of the 1990s, and the trauma lingered. Though celebrations erupted at Voldemort's fall, the fear of his return never fully vanished. The war cemented his status as the darkest wizard of the age, even in apparent defeat. The Third Wizarding War, Voldemort's return, 1995 to 1998. The Third Wizarding War was the final and most decisive conflict of the Harry Potter timeline. It began with the Dark Lord's return to physical form in 1995 and ended in 1998 with his defeat at the Battle of Hogwarts. Unlike the earlier wars, which unfolded over many years, this war was short but brutally intense, compressing its destruction into 3 years of escalating terror. The war began when Lord Voldemort regained his body in the Little Hangleton graveyard at the end of the Triwizard Tournament. Using a dark ritual involving his father's bone, Pettigrew's flesh, and Harry Potter's blood, Voldemort rose again in full strength. His return marked the end of a fragile peace that had lasted since 1981. The Ministry of Magic, however, refused to acknowledge this reality. Cornelius Fudge, fearing political chaos, dismissed reports of Voldemort's return as lies spread by Dumbledore and Harry. This denial allowed Voldemort precious time to regroup, recruit, and plan. In the year following his rebirth, Voldemort kept a low profile, consolidating his power. He reassembled his Death Eaters, punishing deserters and rewarding the faithful. Azkaban was breached in 1996, releasing the most dangerous Death Eaters, including Bellatrix Lestrange. Voldemort also renewed alliances with giants, dementors, and werewolves, ensuring that once the Ministry fell, terror could be deployed on every front. Resistance to his rise began quietly at Hogwarts. Harry and his friends, frustrated by the Ministry's suppression of the truth, created Dumbledore's army to learn defensive magic. This student group not only equipped young witches and wizards with practical skills, but also revived a sense of defiance in a climate of fear. The DA's efforts culminated in the Battle of the Department of Mysteries in 1996, where Harry and his allies clashed with Death Eaters. Although the prophecy concerning Harry and Voldemort was partially revealed and Sirius Black was killed, the battle exposed Voldemort's return publicly, forcing the Ministry to finally admit the truth. From 1996 onward, the conflict escalated rapidly. Voldemort's Death Eaters infiltrated the Ministry, assassinated key figures, and spread terror openly. The murder of Albus Dumbledore in 1997, carried out by Severus Snape during the Battle of the Astronomy Tower, was a defining blow. With Dumbledore gone, Voldemort moved to seize full control of Wizarding Britain. The Ministry was overrun, Rufus Scrimgeour was killed, and Pius Thickness installed as a puppet minister. Once in power, Voldemort unleashed a reign of terror. The Muggle-born Registration Commission was established, forcing Muggle-borns to prove their magical lineage or face imprisonment. Hogwarts was transformed into a bastion of dark ideology, with Severus Snape as headmaster and the Carrows teaching dark arts and enforcing discipline through cruelty. Public fear was absolute, and even saying Voldemort's name became dangerous, as it triggered a magical taboo that allowed Death Eaters to track resistors instantly. Meanwhile, Harry, Ron, and Hermione embarked on their secret mission to destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes. This quest took them across Britain, from the wedding of Bill and Fleur disrupted by Death Eaters, to the infiltration of the Ministry, to a raid on Gringotts. Each Horcrux destroyed weakened Voldemort, though the cost was high in exhaustion, near-death encounters, and growing despair among the trio. The final phase of the war centered on Hogwarts. By 1998, Voldemort had consolidated his forces, but Harry and his allies returned to the castle, rallying the DA, the Order of the Phoenix, and even former students and staff for the decisive battle. The Battle of Hogwarts was the largest single conflict in Wizarding history. It began with Voldemort's demand that Harry surrender, escalated into open war within the castle grounds, and claimed the lives of Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, Fred Weasley, Colin Creevey, and countless others. During the battle, Voldemort discovered that Harry was one of his own Horcruxes, inadvertently created on the night he killed Lily and James. Harry willingly sacrificed himself in the Forbidden Forest, allowing Voldemort to strike him down. However, the fragment of Voldemort's soul within Harry was destroyed, while Harry himself survived through the protection of his mother's sacrifice and his own choice to return. The war ended with Voldemort's final downfall. Voldemort dueled Harry one last time. Believing the Elder Wand to be his, Voldemort unleashed the killing curse. But the wand's loyalty belonged to Harry, who had won it through Draco Malfoy's earlier disarming of Dumbledore. The curse rebounded, killing Voldemort and ending the war. The aftermath left the wizarding world in ruins but free. Voldemort's defeat ended the ideology of blood supremacy as a dominant force, though the scars of the war lingered. Families were shattered, institutions had to be rebuilt, and the losses were immense. Yet the Third Wizarding War brought final closure to decades of dark conflict, ensuring Voldemort's reign of terror could never return. And while the wars defined an era, no figure embodied their complexity more than Severus Snape. His life stretched across all three conflicts, from Death Eater to Double Agent to Unlikely Savior. To truly understand the Wizarding Wars, you need to understand the man who fought on both sides.